Dear viewers and subscribers, I am writing to alert you to an exciting reading event coming up in just over a month. In this reading event, we will be exploring the world of letter writing and journal keeping in an age of instant communication. Stick around to find out what it's all about. Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I have a very special announcement for you. January is usually not anybody's favorite month of the year. The days are short, the nights are long, the weather is not great. Either it's freezing cold and you wish it would snow, or it's freezing cold and you have way too much snow. There aren't many hours of daylight. You don't want to go outside and do anything. So you're cooped up inside and it feels like the month will never end. The holidays are gone. You don't have anything to look forward to. Well, we are bringing you something that you can hopefully look forward to the whole entire month of January, all 31 days, and that is Epistolary January. We hosted it last year and we had a marvelous time. It was so much fun that we decided to bring it back again for another go round. This year, myself and several other hosts, including Cheryl at Candlewick Library, Jeanette at Jane Reads, Kelly at Kelly Reads a Lot, and Jen at Jen's Reading Life, we are all co-hosting Epistolary January. The goal in Epistolary January is to read books that are letter-based. In other words, not typically third-person narrative or first-person narrative, your typical sort of prose, but more like letters exchanged or some variations on that idea, as I will explain in a moment. As we did last year, we have a little chart to help you, a little graphic to help you track the prompts as you go through them. And this year we simplified it a little bit. We have 5 primary prompts plus a bonus prompt. And I will look at each of those and give you some explanation as to what we mean by the various prompt titles, as well as some recommendations for each one of them. But I also want to tell you some of the events, special events that we're going to be doing for Epistolary January that we are adding this year. Last year we had a tag, which I will link to it in the description box below, and you can feel free to resurrect that tag and do it again yourself this year and keep that fun going. But also we are going to have this year 2 live events. Jen at Jen's Reading Life is hosting on January 1st, New Year's Day, a read-along on her channel, a live read-along of 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff, which is an excellent example of an epistolary book. These are actual letters exchanged by the American Helene Hanff, who was living in New York at the time and corresponding with a British book merchant in London and ordering and receiving books. But it developed into so much more than that. You get a glimpse about life post-World War II in London as compared to in America. And you see this developing friendship between these people who both have the common interest of classic literature and classic books. And so it's something that all of us as readers can relate to and enjoy. So Jen will be hosting a read-along of that with reading sprints and everything on New Year's Day. So mark that down, something fun to do the very first day of January. And to close out the month on January 31st, we will be hosting a live event as well with all of the hosts. We will be just discussing all of the books that we read over the course of the month, our favorite epistolary books and novels, the types of letters we enjoy reading, books of letters that we've read, etc. All of the stuff related to letter writing and letters, etc. All that we've read. And that will be at the end of the month on January 31st. And I will be hosting that here on my channel at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, we also at that time will be discussing our group read, because yes, this year we are adding a group read, which you are invited to join in. This group read came about because I was talking about a book that I've really loved reading in the past, and then I kind of wanted to reread this coming January for Epistolary January. And all of the other hosts were so intrigued by it, they were like, well, let's all read it and let's make it a group read. So that book is Wired Love, A Romance of Dots and Dashes by Cheevers Thayer. And that book was written in the late 19th century, and rather than letters, it utilizes telegraph messages between two telegraph operators. I believe it is set in Boston. I might be wrong about that, but I believe it's set in Boston. And it's two telegraph operators. The trope is kind of like You've Got Mail or The Shop Around the Corner, if you're familiar with those movies and that storyline. The trope is very similar to that, but instead of exchanging of letters or emails, we have telegrams, which is so fun. When I read that book, probably about 10 years ago, I had never heard of it before. I just kind of randomly heard someone mention it, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, you know, but I've never heard anybody talk about it. It might be just like really stupid, but I'm gonna give it a try. I loved it so much. I want to reread it again and see if I enjoy it as much as I did before. So I apologize to anybody if it's a total bust and my memories from 10 years ago are totally wrong and it was a terrible book, but I actually have very fond memories of reading it. I remember being really intrigued by the idea that it was centered on single people, single adults, young adults in their 20s who were middle class, working and earning a living, including single women, in the late 19th century. So that's the late Victorian era, but in America. And it was so similar to my memories of my single working life more than 100 years later. And I thought that that was just so interesting and intriguing. And you really don't get that perspective very often. Most often those books either are dealing with like the very poor classes or the very wealthy classes, and you also don't get a lot of perspective of the single working woman at that point in time, because in fact a lot of times you don't think of that being as very common of a thing at that time. In particular was of interest to me, but I also really loved the telegram aspect of it and how these two people were exchanging these telegrams with each other. So that is going to be our group read, and I will put information in the description box below as to where you can find and access this book if you would like to read it yourself as well. So that is our group read. Those are our group events that we are hosting. Now let me tell you a little bit about the prompts as well as my recommendations for them. So to begin with, we have love letters. And of course, that is an epistolary romance. Now I want to say at the outset, before I go into all of these, that we're not being super strict about the term epistolary. In my experience, if you Google and you're looking for lists of ideas of epistolary novels or books or suggestions, people's definition of epistolary varies widely. Some people consider epistolary only to be strictly letter writing or journal entries throughout the whole entire book with no other sort of narrative involved. But other people consider it, if it's mostly letters and or journal entries, then it's epistolary with some sprinkled in narrative to kind of help the story flow along. And other people are yet looser, and as long as there's just alternating letter writing or some other form of written communication or some other sort of communication sprinkled in amongst the actual narrative, then they also consider it epistolary. So there's a broad definition, so nobody's going around policing this. Determine for yourself what you consider to be epistolary, and nobody's following up with you and judging you on it. But straight up epistolary novels are so much fun, so I encourage you to try at least one if you haven't before. And also you may realize that some books that you have read and loved are actually epistolary. You didn't even know that they were. So now back to my recommendations. First of all, for love letters, that would be an epistolary romance, and that I've thought of several as I was coming up with these recommendations, but one that I read last year was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. And this one is more of a fantasy, which is not my typical genre at all, but I really did enjoy the beautiful writing in this story. It was not a perfect book for me. I had some disagreements with it on moral grounds in a couple of different areas, but by and large, I enjoyed this book overall, and I do recommend it as an option for this prompt. Another recommendation would be the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, which if you haven't read it yet, what are you waiting for? It is really a wonderful book, and if I remember correctly, it has been a while since I read it, this one is told strictly in letters. So it is a very strictly epistolary novel, so it fits perfectly within the context of this challenge. And also this one fits for the next prompt I want to mention, which is Lost Mail. And Lost Mail is a book that is written by an author who is no longer with us, which in many cases will be a classic novel, but it doesn't have to be. Like in this case, Marianne Schaefer, who wrote most of this story, died before she could finish it, and so Annie Barrows finished it for her. And so that is an example of a possible one for this prompt of Lost Mail. Another one is the read-along that Jen Reads is hosting on January 1st, and that is 84 Charing Cross Road, because Helene Humph is also no longer with us. She passed away in the 90s, so that one is another one that would fit for that prompt. And there are many, many, many others, but I'm just gonna mention one or two for each of these, or we'll be here all day. And 84 Charing Cross Road also fits the next prompt, which is Correspondence. Now this is the prompt to do if you can't do any others in this reading challenge, which you don't have to do all of them to participate. You can just read an epistolary book. And it doesn't even have to be strictly epistolary, because this prompt includes any book that includes letters at all. So this is where we move beyond strictly epistolary into a more generic, broad view. Any book that contains correspondence between people would qualify. So 84 Charing Cross Road fits for that because it's correspondence, that's all it is. But also, I would recommend Jane Austen's Juvenilia and Lady Susan. And actually, all of Jane Austen's novels contain letters of one kind or another, so any of her books would fit for this prompt. But she has some Juvenilia that's fantastic. One is Love and Friendship, which is a story told entirely in letters. And then we have Lady Susan, which she wrote as a young adult and is very funny, and is also told entirely in letters up until the end. It ties everything up with some narrative. This I read last year for the first time, and I loved it so much. And it is also one of the options for our 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birthday celebration coming up in December. So if you don't get to it in December, then maybe you can tack it onto January. And speaking of Jane Austen, that brings us to our next prompt of journals or journal entries. Siri James has written a couple books. Now, these journals can be actual journals of people, actual people, and I've read some really fantastic journals and memoirs, but the ones I'm going to mention to you today are fictional. The first is The Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen by Siri James. Siri James has written several books in this theme and in this format, where she writes fictional journals or memoirs of actual people. And The Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen is, of course, supposed to be Jane Austen's Lost Memoirs. More recently, I read The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte, which is also supposed to be Charlotte Bronte's diaries. And both of those are fantastic options for this prompt. And The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte also fits for the next prompt, which is airmail. And that is any book that takes place in a foreign country. Foreign to you, of course. So The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte takes place in England. So for me, that's a foreign country. And so that works. But there are many others that would fit that. I haven't read this, but I'm going to mention it as an option also as a recommendation. I've heard really great things, and I intend to read this myself as well. I don't know if I'll get to it in January, but it is going to be high on my list next year. And that is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. It is based on the story of Dracula. I think it's supposed to be like a prequel of Dracula, but it's also epistolary, much like Dracula is. And it has letter writings, and it's set across the ocean in Europe. And as I said, The Historian is a prequel, supposedly, to Dracula by Bram Stoker. And Dracula would fit for that prompt, as well as the next prompt, which is Telegram. Now, Telegram, we called this prompt email last year, but I changed it to Telegram because I liked that better. And Telegram is basically any sort of communication other than spoken communication between the main characters. That is why we are featuring Wired Love, Romance of Dots and Dashes. That features telegrams. And so it goes with this prompt for that reason. It's also not strictly epistolary. It's one that has a lot of telegraph communication, but it also has third-person narrative as well to help the story flow along. So it's not strictly epistolary either. Dracula is more strictly epistolary, and it does have journal entries, and it does have letters, and it does have official documentation, all of which are options. But for this telegram prompt, it should be something that is other than just oral communication or handwritten communication. And that is more modern forms of communication that utilize advancements in communication since the 19th century. So, for example, in the book Dracula, one of the characters who is contributing to the narration of the story, he records all of his observations that are happening during the course of the story. He records them on a phonograph, I believe. So that is an older form of technology, but it is something other than strict oral or written communication. And so that one fits for that prompt as well. And a book that I read last year for Epistolary January that I loved a lot was The Appeal by Janice Hallett, and I borrowed it from the library, so I don't have a copy to show you, but that one utilizes text messages and email threads, as well as court documents and the like, to tell the story. I think it uses newspaper articles, all sorts of things, chat threads, that kind of stuff, to tell the story, the contemporary story that is happening. So any book that utilizes emails, text messages, telegrams, and other modern forms of communication that require technology in order to be produced, that fits under the umbrella of this prompt telegram. So get creative with this one. I look forward to seeing what ideas people come up with for that. And finally, we have a bonus prompt. And we made it a bonus prompt because it may be a little more difficult to find options for this one, and that is subscription. And for the subscription prompt, you want to read or start or continue in a series, an epistolary series. One of the first ones that comes to mind is the Emma M. Lyon series, which is told strictly in journal entries, so it is fully epistolary. There are currently 8 volumes, and I don't know when the 9th volume is supposed to be released, but I know that there will be quite a few more volumes, is my understanding. So that one is definitely an option. I highly recommend the Emma M. Lyon series. Another one is I forget the name of the series, something like Chronicles. I forget the girl's first name, but Dear Mrs. Bird is the first one. And then there are several others in the series. And this one, again, is not strictly epistolary. There are letters. Letters play a huge part in the development of the plot and the story and what is happening in the story. It could not be told without letters. So for my mind, it fits. I sort of feel like that's my definition of epistolary. Like if the letters are crucial to the flow of the story or the plot of the story, and the story could not have been told without the inclusion of those letters, then I feel like that's epistolary. So anyway, Dear Mrs. Bird and the succeeding books in that series would totally qualify for that bonus prompt. So I think that is all the information. I will also put all of that in the description box below, so you can reference back to that. I will put links to the graphics below as well, so you can print them out and put them in your journal if you want, and keep track of what you read. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite book that you read last year for January Epistolary was, if you participated, and also if you plan to participate this coming year, and what are some books that you hope to get to. Also, for those who are watching who might be looking for recommendations, please drop in the comments below your recommendations for your favorite epistolary works, however you want to define epistolary. So that is Epistolary January. I hope you will join us, and let's have a good time.